Hello friends, thank you for being champions of sustainable purchasing. We hope this video about sustainable purchasing version 2.0, the program approach, will help you be successful. If it does, please let us know. One of the more profound discoveries SPLC made when collecting input from hundreds of professionals and organizations to create our guidance for leadership in sustainable purchasing has been the discovery of what I like to call sustainable purchasing version 2.0. Organizations whose sustainable purchasing initiatives are knocking it out of the park from a cost savings, impact reduction, and benefit productions perspective are operating their programs very differently than others. But before we talk about that and version 2.0, it's helpful to say what is sustainable purchasing version 1.0. When our senior executives hear us talk about sustainable purchasing, many of them, the only thing that they can relate it to is their experience as a consumer. Picking up each product and asking, is there a better alternative to this? Many of them then imagine that what sustainable purchasing champions want is for them to go through all the 10,000 items their organization buys and try to figure out if there's a more sustainable alternative for each. This is where a lot of the resistance to doing sustainable purchasing comes from. And it's not misplaced. For decades, this is how environmentally preferable purchasing advocates have said it should be done, product by product, contract by contract. It's how I was told to do it by all the experts we consulted when we started the environmentally preferable purchasing program at Duke University in 2003. And we did that, and we had a lot of successes. We had great stories to tell about $100,000 saved here, thousands of barrels of oil saved there. But after 3 years, I realized that I couldn't answer some pretty key questions. What's been our cumulative impact? Have we cut Duke's procurement-related impacts by 5%, 10%, negative 15%? Have they actually gone up on us? The university was growing at the time. And how much have I saved overall? And how will I ever get to all the 10,000 products that we buy? Fortunately, new tools that simply weren't available 15 years ago are making it possible to answer those kinds of questions. This is a spend analysis that SPLC conducted for an average US-based higher education institution. What it showed is that just 5 areas of purchasing make up 64% of a school's spending and 83% of its estimated environmental impacts. And this is great news, because what it means is that sustainable purchasing can be done strategically by targeting a small number of big opportunities to have a positive impact. Now for what I like to call sustainable purchasing version 2.0, the program approach. Before I explain what it is, let me show you what it looks like in action and how big of a difference it can make. The County of Alameda has been a leader in taking a program approach to sustainable purchasing. In 2010, their program leader, whose job it is as the program leader to monitor their spending for impacts, noticed that their paper purchasing was trending in all the wrong directions. Paper use was going up, but recycled content was not. And so she was asking, why aren't we meeting these goals? And she stepped back and did some calculations and said, okay, if we wanted to get to our goal of 100% post-consumer recycled content paper, the way that we could do that is just go ahead and say we're going to only buy 100% post-consumer recycled content paper. And this is called product substitution. It's buying better. And that's the essence of sustainable purchasing version 1.0. Is there a better product than the one I'm currently buying? But when she looked at this, she realized that that was going to add $120,000 to their annual budget, or a 17% increase. And that clearly just wasn't going to fly. What she was able to do is step back and say, well, what's the size of this opportunity? And she was able to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions that would be offset by making that switch. And it turned out that the scale of the greenhouse gas emissions that could be saved by making that switch could be the equivalent of as much as a third of their county fleet, the equivalent of a third of their county fleet vehicles. And as you can imagine, getting your county to give up a third of its fleet vehicles, quite a challenge. But the county was at that time focused on trying to cut its greenhouse gas emissions at that kind of a scale. And so she was able to go to the leadership and say, look, I've got an initiative here that has a big opportunity. Can I get permission to convene the cross-functional stakeholders who are all involved in buying paper and take them through a process where we will look deeply at what are the impacts here? What are we using paper for and why? Where are we using it inefficiently? Where could we be using it more efficiently, and so on? Where could we not use it at all? And then we'll plan a multi-pronged strategy to really reduce the impacts associated with our paper purchasing. And when they did that, they ended up coming up with a number of different strategies, product substitution just being one. So this is a solution strategies worksheet that SPLC has that you can download on our website. And it's a great sheet for using in brainstorming with teams, and particularly cross-functional stakeholders, when thinking about what are all the ways that we could change our purchasing to reduce the impacts associated with a given product or service. And it turns out that there are lots of things you can do in addition to buying better. There's demand reduction, there's process changes, there's behavior changes, there's supplier engagement, supplier accountability strategies, and so on, all the way down to offsetting, which is where you go and basically pay someone else to offset the impact that you can't offset directly. And so what they did was they ended up in this working group of looking at all the major paper users, identifying 6 different strategies and multiple projects within each of those strategies that they could implement together. And that by implementing those together, they could really drive down their paper use and also get agreement by everybody to go and bid what was left of their paper use 100% for post-consumer recycled content paper. And the really important thing here was that aspect of doing this as a project where they were going to do all of these things together and therefore were able to get a breakthrough outcome. In the end, they reduced their total paper usage by 20% and their greenhouse gas emissions by about the equivalent of 86 cars per year. But the most amazing thing is that they actually reduced the county's paper consumption by $100,000 a year, or 19%. And the delta there, between the version 1.0 approach and this version 2.0 approach was a $220,000 difference per year in terms of getting to that goal that they had. The version 1.0 approach versus the version 2.0 approach. Huge difference in outcome, and not just in terms of dollars, but they ended up with better processes and happier and more engaged employees as a result as well. So just to compare these two approaches, first of all, the version 1.0 approach is fairly reactive. It responds to upcoming contracts or products that people are not happy with or issues that people are concerned about. It tends to operate product by product, contract by contract. Your program leader tends to be a spec writer, somebody who really can dig into the environmental or social aspects and write better specs and better contract terms. And typically the metrics for a program, a sustainable purchasing version 1.0 program, tend to be things like how much of our spending are we getting around to? How many of our contracts or our products have we been able to green? And the focus does tend to be on the environment and on product substitutions. The collaborators tend to be primarily just the budget holders of the specific contracts or products, the end users. And the visibility of the program tends to peak around a manager or director level. Sustainable Purchasing version 2.0 programs look a lot different. They tend to be highly proactive. They're focused on identifying in front of the tactical procurement process the greatest opportunities to have a positive impact or reduce a risk. And by doing that, by identifying those opportunities, they're able to convene stakeholders around one big opportunity after another big opportunity after another. And so they operate project by project. And the program leader is a stakeholder process facilitator. Their expertise is in convening the appropriate stakeholders and helping them understand their opportunity to make a huge difference by rethinking how they're doing their purchasing, and bring to them those things like that strategy worksheet and lead them through a brainstorming process where they are able to reimagine the ways that they meet their needs in a number of different ways that add up to a huge impact, dollar savings, and other things. They also tend to be more inclusive. So these types of programs end up connecting up existing things like supplier diversity and ethics and supplier codes of conduct with environmental attributes. Because really, when you start rethinking your purchasing in that kind of a way, you start to realize that there are tremendous opportunities to have a positive impact along the way. And the other thing is that the purchasing strategy, the primary strategy, is not just buying better, it's buying less, buying differently, and then buying better. And the collaborators on these projects tend to be much more than the current budget holders just trying to get their needs met and get their thing bought. It ends up being end users and suppliers and external stakeholders who have, maybe in NGOs, who have technical expertise. And the really incredible thing is that because these projects end up producing such huge wins for the organization, the visibility of the program ends up in the C-suite. It really is a completely different way of doing this, and it's highly strategic, and it's not unlike how purchasing organizations already run a number of the other types of procurement programs. So your organization may have a strategic sourcing program, may have a category management program, or supplier diversity program, and hopefully it also has a sustainable purchasing program. The rationale for all of these programs is exactly the same, and that is that by adding a strategic planning process ahead of a more tactical procurement process, you're able to generate results that more than pay for the cost of running that strategic planning process. So let's talk quickly about the core components that you need to have a sustainable purchasing program. First of all, you need a commitment from your organization to invest some time and resources and political will and cross-functional time into running this process. And then secondly, you need resources to support that process being run. And you need a prioritization process so that you're actually able to identify and target those high impact opportunities. And then ultimately you need a continuous improvement process. So you need somebody who's watching the reports to make sure that things are trending in the right direction after you implement a project, and convening people if they're not. And so a lot of folks get intimidated by the idea that you need all of these things, but let's just keep in mind that this can start very, very lightweight. If you're a champion who's just trying to build interest in a program at your organization, you can just start with a senior manager sponsor, giving you the time to spend a little bit of your time on this. It can be a small amount as 10% of one FTE, convening people around some big opportunities. And why not start off with a simple prioritization process, like matching your project to some clear executive priorities where there's a sustainability alignment. And as I said, you can start with one project with some simple metrics and demonstrate performance improvement, and then go from there. But the really important thing is that you be envisioning a full program from the beginning. If you don't do that and you aren't holding up that vision to everyone who's collaborating with you on it, then it'll just look like a long series of one-off pilot projects. So SPLC's Guidance for Leadership and Sustainable Purchasing is a comprehensive document hosted in SPLC's online member community that covers in many pages the best practices that we accumulated from interviewing, like I said, and engaging hundreds of professionals who are involved in this work. And it covers in Chapter 2 how to prepare a vision for a sustainable purchasing program, how to enlist the key stakeholders' support for that vision, how to then design the actual particulars of how your program will work within your organizational context, and then how to approach your senior leadership to win commitment to implementing that program. Chapter 3 focuses on a process for how to go about running these types of projects that I just talked about. And then Chapter 4 has playbooks that run through this process for specific categories. But just to give you a quick sense of what it looks like to run this process, you would start out by identifying an area. Here we're going to say we're going to do a fuel strategy for the organization. So we'd go to management and say we're going to develop a fuel strategy. There's a big opportunity we think here. We're going to convene the cross-functional stakeholders in all of our fuel purchasing, all the users and the buyers, and we're going to engage them in doing the work of analyzing what are we buying fuel for, where are we using it, what kinds of fuel are we using, and what are the impacts associated with that. And by engaging those stakeholders in the process, A, we have a lot better chance of getting the data that we need, and B, we end up having an educational process where they start to understand the scale of the opportunity that's available to them. And then you go into the planning process and you identify multiple strategies, multiple projects that can be put together into one plan. And with your stakeholders, you figure out which of those they're most excited about and that fit together the best. And you're able to come up with and understand the impacts that are associated with that plan. So you're able to say, okay, we've mapped out these projects with these stakeholders, and we're going to save 20% fuel use and $1 million if we do this. When you go to your executive leadership and ask for commitment to do this plan, it's a usual green light, because your leadership sees that you know exactly what needs to be done, you know the implications of doing it, and most importantly, you already have all the stakeholders and end users bought in. So even though it is a complicated project and it's got a lot of parts to it, you have all the pieces you need to get the green light and to implement. And so then you go into implementation, and it's a pretty simple process because everybody already knows their role because you've already planned it all out. And then you, importantly, during the implementation, you set up reporting to be able to track whether or not the project is performing as expected. And that's again where your program leader comes in. Your program leader is the one who's the consumer of that data, who makes sure that the project is performing as expected and that the impacts associated with the organization's spending are really improving. And then if they're not, then the program leader can relaunch the process. This is, as I mentioned earlier, something that you can build a program up to iteratively. And so this diagram here shows an organization that has a strong sustainable purchasing program with an electricity strategy, a supplier diversity strategy, an IT strategy, and a human rights strategy. And they've built that program up over a period of time by first running through the strategy cycle to launch their program, to develop their electricity strategy, to develop their supplier diversity strategy, to develop their IT strategy, then their human rights strategy, and then they looped back around and added onto their electricity strategy. And this is how one program leader can facilitate an organization developing a number of comprehensive strategies over time that really set the organization up to have a tremendous impact. So SPLC has taken that guidance one step further. The guidance and the set of principles for leadership and sustainable purchasing that they are also based on have been combined into a maturity model for leadership and sustainable purchasing that shows on a number of areas on those principles and best practices a path from just getting started all the way through to leadership level performance. And so that maturity model, which is quite complex, and as you can see here, looks at a number of different areas of operational control, starting from your organizational policies and management practices, all the way through to your employee buyer training and your supplier and stakeholder engagement, and asks for a number of activities or areas of operation or areas where you can have influence within those operational controls. What does it mean to be going from just getting started all the way to leadership? And what's important is that this maturity model provides for us not only a high bar, but really the aspiration that we want, which is that it indicates what it would look like if all purchasing organizations were doing the things that we need to be doing, or that we will be doing, when we have the truly sustainable global economy of our dreams. So if you're interested in any of this guidance or in using the benchmark maturity model to assess your organization and its maturity of its sustainable purchasing program, this is what we do in the council. We like to support organizations with what I like to call the how, the who, and the what. The how is your organization institutional practices and how you integrate sustainable purchasing into your internal strategy. Things like how do we analyze our spending for impacts? How do we strategically engage stakeholders? And then the who part is your suppliers. Are we engaging our suppliers and developing their capabilities to bring in solutions that help us meet our sustainability goals? Are we communicating to them that we want them to be sustainability leaders and that ultimately we don't want to be doing business with sustainability laggards? And then there's the category piece, the what. For a given product or service, how do we identify what's the most sustainable way that we can approach purchasing that service? Not just the attributes of the product or service, but how we use it, the processes we use it within, the amount of demand that we have for it, and so on. So I hope that that's been useful. If you're interested in any of these tools, you can find them all in our online member community at community.sustainablepurchasing.org. Thanks so much.